Where do Christians get the idea that there is a 7-year time of trouble at the end of the age? Well, Jesus talks about it. He describes a 7-year sequence of end-time events using the stages of childbirth as an analogy. Early birth pains are the first half, and greater distress or tribulation is the second half. Fun fact, this latter period is actually where we get the term Great Tribulation. He also tells us the dividing line between the early birth pains and great distress is a specific event called the Abomination of Desolation. Jesus also tells us we should look to the prophet Daniel for details of this time period. Let's take a look. In Daniel 9, we see Daniel praying to God, confessing the sins of his people and asking God specific questions regarding the fate of Jerusalem, the fate of the Temple Mount, and the fate of the Jewish people. God immediately responds to his prayer by sending an angel with the answers to his questions. In some ways, the answers the angel gives looks more like a mathematical equation than prophecy of future events, because he speaks about the events in numbers. But before we look at the numbers, let's look at how Jewish language plays a role in the interpretation. In the Jewish language, Shavim is a group of 7 years. A lot of Bibles simply translate it for us and call it sevens. Now that we know what we're looking at, in verse 24, the angel says 70 sevens, that's groups of 7 years, are decreed for your people, the Jews, and your holy city, Jerusalem, to finish transgression, put an end to sin, atone for wickedness, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up vision and prophecy, anoint the most holy. So the amount of time it will take to accomplish all of these things is 70 sets of 7 years. 70 sevens. 70 times 7 years is 490 years. So in 490 years, everything on this list will be accomplished. Next, he gives Daniel our math problem, which explains the timeline. Calculators ready? Verse 25 says, "From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It, Jerusalem, will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, meaning the infrastructure will be restored, but in times of trouble, Roman occupation. So 7 sevens plus 62 sevens equals 69 sevens. Multiply 69 times 7 years, and we get 483 years. So in that 483 years, Jerusalem will be rebuilt under Roman occupation. Pretty interesting, eh? Now to verse 26. After the 62 sevens, meaning the next thing that will happen, the Messiah, Jesus, will be put to death and have nothing, which means he'll be killed. Up to this point, 69 sevens of the prophesied 70 sevens have occurred. That only leaves 1 7 left. 1 7-year period left to finalize the things that the angel told him would happen to his people, his city, and the temple. The big question is, when will that last 7 years begin that will usher in the kingdom of God? It's been almost 2,000 years since the Messiah was cut off. The next information the angel gives, by definition, must fit into that last 7-year time period. It'll tell us what event will mark the beginning of the last 7 years, and what event will mark the end of the last 7 years. First, the angel gives an overview, then backs up to explain how it will get started. Listen very carefully as the prophecy continues. Here's the overview. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. So who is this ruler who will come, and who are his people? Is this the same ruler Jesus spoke of that will cause the abomination of desolation? Is it the same guy that Jesus says will surround Jerusalem with armies? That is exactly what Jesus is telling us. Now the messenger backs up to give the details. He, well, who is he? Will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. That's one group of 7 years. In the middle of the 7-year span, that's 3.5 years, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. At the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Yes, this is the same man Jesus spoke of who will lead an attack on Jerusalem. This is the same ruler Paul speaks of in 2 Thessalonians 2, calling him the man of lawlessness. So, in review, there must be 70 sets of 7-year time periods to fulfill the prophecy given by the angel. 69 sevens have already occurred. The last 7-year period is the missing puzzle piece that we are all awaiting. When will it start? We're talking about the return of Jesus here. Okay. We are told it begins when an agreement is confirmed with many. We're not told in Daniel who the many are, but other prophets tell us that Israel's leadership will be involved. Isaiah 28:14-15 calls this a covenant with death and Hades, entered into by Israel's rulers in Jerusalem. According to Isaiah, Israel will enter into this protection agreement hoping to find peace, but it will actually bring terror. So where do Christians get the idea that there is a specific 7-year time of trouble left at the end of the age? Jesus tells us to look at the prophecies of Daniel. Interestingly, the first half of Daniel's prophecy was mathematically fulfilled precisely at Jesus' first coming, just as the angel described. Will the second half regarding his second coming be just as exact? Are we paying attention as Jesus instructed? Maybe it's time we take another look and read God's prophetic instructions with new eyes and an open heart.